capital of the world. So tonight we're going to be talking about pitch anything. And if you tuned in last week, you know that we really went through a lot of conversation around framing and status. And our panel is back to bring you the final content and final discussion around this awesome book. Harold, Mike, if you will please join me. Hello, gentlemen.
Hey there, how you doing?
Hello. I'm great. I'm inside in San Francisco. I mean, it's, very fortunate. Keeping in pace with the book, Oren says that the best people to introduce themselves are their own self. So please take it away. Tell the audience who you are. Harold, we'll start with you.
Cool. Great. Thanks for having me again, Cynthia. My name is Harold Strong. I live in North Texas. I'm president of Medical Innovation Collaborative. It's a nonprofit building the life science ecosystem in North Texas, and have really enjoyed reading this book. I've really used the book to kind of reflect on past experience I've had with Nike, with Procter & Gamble, as well as in the nonprofit world. So look forward to discussion. Please reach out to me on LinkedIn. Love to meet you. And Cynthia, again, thanks for having me.
My pleasure. Mike?
Cynthia, it's great to be here and hang out with both of you. Last week was way too much fun. I'm Mike Minosky. I am a longtime recruiter. Prior to that, I was an engineer, and prior to that, I was a hospital administrator. So I bring a very eclectic, weird background. Pick your word. I'm also a certified coach, and for the last 7 years, I've been working at Wharton in the Executive MBA program, co-leading programs in career development. With a background that I have, having hired so many people, knowing the process, I'm able to mix classic coaching methodology along with the real world of here's what it takes to get a job.
Excellent. And of course, everyone, you know me. I'm Cynthia Abbott. We all talked about, Oren kind of takes you through this extreme journey of pitching and framing, and it's a very marketing heavy book, which is phenomenal. And when you're a job seeker, you're essentially marketing yourself and pitching yourself. But we received and comments from our audience last week, and I wanted to circle back on the topic of status. And when we're reading Pitch Anything, Oren takes you through and he talks about how when you go in to pitch yourself, when you go in to pitch a deal, you really need to reflect a certain level of status. And as a female, depending on the audience that's across the table for me, that will inform a lot of the pitching or the anecdotes that I share. I've also felt the need to hold back in certain instances because there have been times where I've been told, well, your partner works, you don't need this job. Or it seems like you have a really good life, you don't need this opportunity. And I really wanted to know kind of the perspective and the psychology around what other people have experienced. Harold, you've been in a number of situations. And when we think about this from a diversity and inclusion perspective, we know that minority opportunities are so few compared to, how do you bring that status forward while also not potentially increasing a stereotype or not limiting your ability to have this offer? I'd love to know your thoughts on that.
When I was reading that, there's so many different perspectives to review on that conversation. There is one as a hiring manager where you see someone who comes in, they're very aggressive, they're definitely interested in the opportunity and they want that job, and they go into overdrive in selling it. So that's one perspective. One perspective is I'm the person looking for that opportunity. I'm interviewing for the job. And historically and traditionally and culturally, it's often said that if you are not in the majority, you have to be over prepared and over accomplished to be even considered for the job. So you've spent a lot of time shaping the resume to ensure that it fits and meets the requirements of this particular job opportunity. And you have prepared your initial presentation. And before reading Pitch Anything, my spiel, my pitch, my proposal to them in consideration for this position. And you're prepared for a variety of different pushbacks or objections or just challenges that may be thrown your way. And then if you look at it from the book's perspective, which this is a person who is in the investment world, and he's prepared through years of experience and his exposure to his network, he's very prepared for the opportunity to present and to demonstrate his experience, his background, his education, that he's capable to handle the question, concerns, and challenges. So personally, the opportunity is to try to measure the right amount of information. What are the key things that I have to present jobs where I'm proposing to run an innovation district for a region? You know, you want to understand who the investors are, where the source of technologies are coming from, who are the universities in the community, and what stage of development are they in, and who are those entrepreneurs, and can I get to know them? Can I have a previous conversation in advance, so that it's not just who I am, it's using what I know to influence the community so I can have that information that's relevant at the table. So wrapping that up in a tight little bundle, the opportunity is, who am I and who am I to this opportunity? How can I demonstrate that both in terms of my background as well as my preparation for this opportunity? If I'm the hiring manager, I want to give that applicant enough rope so that they can set the stage any way they like, but be prepared to challenge that stage once it's set. So it's an exciting conversation. We could spend a lot of time on it, but that's my...
We could have probably 20 different conversations about that alone. But Mike, where I wanted to circle this back with you is, being in San Francisco, we are the startup, we are the hustle, really, businesses come here, everyone's got a pitch. Majority of people you talk to, myself included, they've started some type of business, what have you. How do you bring your status of what you're doing potentially as an entrepreneur into the conversation when you're a job seeker?
It's a great question, and I think a lot of what Harold was talking about translates to this as well. It's not about the chest beating. It's not about the, wow, I've done cool things. It's about, I've had an impact. One of the things that we talk about, I talk in my private practice, I talk at Wharton, in the book that we're finishing up, it's the idea of you talk about impact. You know what? And if the impact that you keep talking about is you're going to lose a room real fast. But if your impact is, I had this idea, I brought together this amazing group of people, and this is what we did, and I am so proud of the team for creating this thing. The room is now riveted. And I think that's what's really important is getting away from the idea that it's about you. It's about the impact you have done directly and influenced others to contribute to. Does that tie in with what you're saying?
Absolutely.
Yeah. Okay.
Absolutely. Because it's coming back from the me to the we. One thing, and we've talked about this broadly, we talked about this in our prep chat, this is very much an I-focused book.
Yep.
Right? And so I think there's anecdotes that we have to extract here for our job seekers, while understanding that, to your point, Mike, you have to bring it back to the we. And one thing I wanted to really pick your brain on here, Mike, is when, Oren is talking about presenting your pitch, right? He follows a method that I've advised people to do before, keep it simple, keep it moving, right? Don't get caught up in any negative past experiences, nothing dramatic, right? Now, I have had instances where people have shared with me, and from my own experience, where you have someone that is very strong in a power frame, and they are determined to know when you failed. Mm-hmm. And the book really doesn't go into failures, because you're pitching your win, you're pitching what you should do. You're so great. Companies should do business with you. How, as a job seeker, do you encapsulate the antidote around there was a point of failure while also still showing that you're the person for the job and to solve those problems?
I am so glad you asked that question, because it's, in fact, when I walk through coaching around job search and interviewing, failure is one of my 5 questions. And as a recruiter and as a hiring manager, I ask it all the time. Here's why. What I want to hear in a failure question is, I want to understand what you did. And I'm looking for 2 elements. Number 1, did you throw anybody in that story under the bus? Okay, if you did, we have a problem.
Right.
So tell me what you're accountable for. Here's what I did wrong. And the second thing is that goes into the lessons learned. Here's what I corrected so I won't do it again. And that's when I think it's interesting to when you start talking about lessons learned. I'm interested in hearing about the failure because I don't want my company to do the same thing that you had experience with before. I want to know about it so that if we start going down that path, you can go, hey, guess what? We did this and it didn't work. And awesome. We know you've saved us time, effort, money. Failure can be an incredibly valuable experience. And we've got to get away from this idea that if I failed, I'm bad. Failure, the whole fail fast, I think is kind of a loose lip sort of thing. But I'm more interested in the idea of fail and learn. Don't do it twice.
I completely agree. And Mike, we actually have a comment from one of our viewers for you. It says, Mike, what do you think about women who more often say we than I and talking about their accomplishments? When can humility hurt you?
When it's we every time. So, can I give a quick framework on an answer?
Certainly.
And Harold, be interesting to hear what you think as well. Okay. So what's interesting is when you're dealing with an I and we, here's a way to answer. I had this opportunity to build this team, and we took an idea from a whiteboard. We built it out. I was able to recruit a great team to work with me on this. And the cool thing was they each had such great strengths that what was an original idea that I had or a small group has had blossomed into this really strong solution. So, what I'm particularly proud of is being able to work with, to be able to recruit, build, and work with great people. That for me is the light up. So you should mix it.
Yep.
Harold, can I double click on this with you for a minute? Because especially being the president of the Medical Innovative Collaborative, I mean, you're pitching to people to come in, do business with you. This is a new concept for North Dallas, yep. North Texas. This is really not a space where you want to highlight failure. And I think part of highlighting failure or any experience, right, a win or a loss, is also getting comfortable with that. Right. The age old tell me about yourself. Right. You can talk about anything. But then when it comes to talk about yourself, there's a lot of trepidation that goes with that. How do you manage that as far as pulling people into the idea, but also talking about times when maybe it wasn't successful?
It's almost a reverse sale of sorts, right? Because this isn't a job. This isn't an opportunity to be hired per se. Because in that you have a job description, you have a definition of what they're looking for. It's defined and it's right there. Everybody agrees to those terms. That's why we're in the room. In the case of Medical Innovation Collaborative, we have to do a little fishing expedition. We have to do a discovery exercise to understand, here is what we offer, but I don't want to tell you everything until I understand, what do you need? And then once we understand what you need, then we can kind of dive into what additional value can we offer that makes what you need that much better. Now, we can't solve everything for everyone, but at least we understand what's on the table. And then we can kind of, let me open up the curtain a little bit more to kind of share what MIC wants to provide to the region. We have great relationships with Israeli companies, with local companies. So how can we fit somewhere in the middle of that? And so there's the challenge. Failure in this scenario is defined either as not listening to the person that you're talking to, or misunderstanding their feedback to you. Two different things, right? So the opportunity is the same, using this book to help grow and to expand the role that MIC plays in the region. But it's a slightly different kind of sales process, pitch process.
So when Oren's talking, he talks about, you're going to frame the conversation, right? Then you're going to have your status, right? Then you get to pitching your big idea. And part of pitching your big idea, it also requires this concept of what he refers to as hot cognition, right? And that the cognitive connections in the brain, and Mike, I'm going to touch on, medicine here, and it's a rough quote, but he's talking about dopamine receptors in the brain,
Mm-hmm.
and that when you're talking to someone, you're essentially trying to talk around their crocodile Neolithic brain, make them not feel threatened, and then also receive this yummy dopamine receptor that you're the person here to solve the problem. You're not going to make them feel threatened. And of the hot cognition that he lists, he says intrigue, prize, time, or moral authority are the most powerful frames when you're pitching. Now, when you think of that, and you think of that from a job seeker, you think about that as clients you've coached, what either combination or standalone do you think is the most powerful framing and cognition complement?
You want me to go first?
Certainly.
So I think a couple things. First of all, time is so underrated. There is such a great question as a candidate to go. This is a classic question I have a candidate ask. If the world's perfect, when is this person in their desk the first day? When is the first day they're on your team? Because all of a sudden now you're trying to get it. You're trying to go, how urgent are you? And you're trying to plant the seed of, wow, they're sitting there. She's sitting there. Wow, we finally got her. So, it's that, you're right. It's that dopamine rush. It's that end of the run high. We're trying to get them the runner's high in this whole thing. And then moral authority, I'm careful with, because it depends on the person across the table from you. What is their role? There are people, I've got a client tomorrow interviewing with 6 or 7 people he will be managing. Moral authority he has to be careful with. So you've got to be cautious with that. But the idea of being able to say, and I think, and Harold, you do this, I'm sure, we know how to solve that. I've solved that problem.
Right.
If that does not kick in a dopamine high, nothing does.
Right.
Because that is, but you better be able to back it up. You better be able to explain how you've solved it. Yep. But if you can say, I can be here when you need me, and I've dealt with that problem before, runner's high.
So,
if I could just tag on.
Please, go ahead.
The key thing to that is you don't want to get too much into how the clock is made. You just want to share what time it is. I can solve that. And then they'll say, well, how do you do that? Well, let's set up some time where we can discuss that in more detail when we are more prepared. But the problem you mentioned, we have a solution to that. So the crocodile brain is still going, this is all good, and you're not going to slow it down and you get a cold room when you dive into the details.
Let me add to your ad. It's a great ad. What you're really saying is, okay, you may want to go into, we have a process for that. And I've been able to, through my experience, learn how to deal with the major pieces of that. And the major pieces of that are bum, bum, bum.
Right.
Now, right. I think we don't have time today to go into it, and there's kind of the takeaway, but
it's the prize, right? You're sprinkling
the prize is you bring me on, and the curtain opens.
One thing I did want to ask, and we've all had this experience, right, is as a job seeker, you're pitching yourself and you're using these techniques and these tools to convince this company. And in your own adrenaline and dopamine and, let's say, acceptance seeking behavior, right? You want to be accepted. You want them to make you this job offer. How do you untwine and make sure that you're seeing through the smoke screen properly? When you read the book, The 4 Agreements, the first thing that talks about is that we're essentially seeing each other through this fake smoke, and that it's not until we lift that screen that we can truly understand. I think a lot of job seekers are pitching how they can solve this problem, and companies say, oh, we want a problem solver. But how do you navigate that? Because when you think about the crocodile brain, most people actually don't want to be told how to solve said problem or really admit that there is a problem. How do you advise that job seekers also look at this reflectively and don't get kind of pulled into the emotion of this experience? Mike.
So Harold and I are both saying, hey, we got thoughts here. I think the really important part about that is, we'll be touching on neediness before we get off here. But I think the important thing is if you're feeling a sense that they're holding back, that's a flag. That's saying, okay, they may not know, they may not feel comfortable, they may not feel safe. Remember that you're doing this at 2 levels or 2 pieces. One piece is competence, and you're interviewing them equally. Are they competent? The other one is, can I work with this person? And if I'm getting a sense that the more I talk with them, the more they're lobbing smoke grenades into the room, I'm getting uncomfortable. So, I understand that people want to be careful about proprietary knowledge. They want to be careful about oversharing, which I think is appropriate. But at the same time, we've got to understand what the core issues are. Otherwise, you can't move forward. And if you're not really feeling that, yellow to red flag just got hoisted.
Agreed. Harold.
Yeah, I don't disagree with that. I think it also has a lot to do with which interview are we talking about? Is this an introduction, or is this kind of getting closer to some decision being made? And then it also depends on who's the interviewer. Is this person collecting information to share back to others who aren't in the room, and they may not have a really good grasp? Or, as Mike is kind of sharing, are they just lobbing smoke grenades just to watch you dance? Regardless, the opportunity to, you're prepared for the interview, you know your stuff, you're ready to go. Let's just follow the lead and offer as much as we need to keep the dopamine going, because you can usually tell when that room starts getting a little cold. You need to get another shot in. Or if this is a lost cause and you just need to kind of, what can we salvage out of this deal? And you're going to have those feelings, but you have to be able to plow through, as one of the comments in his book, once you've started it, you got to go and see where it is.
Yeah. And also in the book, and this kind of brings into a topic you had mentioned, Mike, the neediness component. But one thing that Oren talks about is consistency. And, we're seeing a lot now of multiple interviews, right? Like you had mentioned, Mike, someone's meeting with several people tomorrow that will potentially be their direct reports. How do you maintain that consistency? How do you maintain that engagement? And then when you're a leader that's interviewing with potential directs, how do you not get misaligned in that power frame and make people feel comfortable? I mean, you've got potentially 45 minutes, maybe not even a full hour, to convince people over a Zoom chat that you're the right person. I mean, we're not even shaking hands anymore.
Right. Well, I think Harold really outlined some great points earlier. The idea that watch the room. Try to. Well, let me go back. I was talking about this is a leader that's being interviewed by the team. He's already interviewed with the senior leadership. They like him. Now he's got to interview with the team. I've had situations when I've hired people like that where the team said no and we didn't move forward. So the team in that case has equal power. Does that mean you go in and execute your power? No. What our conversation was around servant leader, was around how does he become an equal to them? How does he explain he is their advocate? And that goes right to some of the stuff Harold was talking about earlier, is knowing your room, keeping an eye on the energy, but also also watching your framing. That's not the place you want to walk in and be a drill sergeant. That's a place where you want to walk in and show, I'm going to be your advocate. I'm going to get some pressure off you. That's not
so interesting about like a drill sergeant comment. And Mike, Harold, you probably both know where I'm going to go with this, are like when people accuse someone of having like a Napoleon complex. Actually, to be a leader and to lead individuals in a setting that is unknown to them, you actually can't be a control freak. You actually can't misrepresent power. You can't, you have to be so astute in your framing and so aware of what you're presenting that it doesn't get misaligned, which I have always, anecdotally found very interesting. So when Oren's taking us through this, and we're saying, okay, these are the framing techniques that we think we want to use when steering a conversation. Here's how we want to bring status into the equation so that it's a benefit to us as job seekers or as coaches of job seekers, so that it's not a hindrance. And then when we go to pitch our big idea, we're going to keep it clean. We're going to keep it concise. We're going to keep it moving. Because Harold, to the point you made, once you start, you got to keep going. Mm-hmm. You have to make the pitch. But one thing he really talks about is being able to disengage and not have emotional connection to the outcome of said pitch. to eradicate the neediness, essentially. Don't stop and ask someone, is that okay? Did you like that? Which, as you both can probably speak to, runs a little counter to what we tell job seekers as far as like pulse in, check in. So Harold, how have you, kind of run through this and advised others? And Mike, I'd love to hear from you.
No, those are really challenging points, although obvious they're challenging if you're in the middle of it, right? Because the opportunity is, I have a conversation going. Who knows when I'm going to have another opportunity to work for this brand or get this position or get this location or the potential salary. This is nice. But then you realize, what do I got to do to get this thing again? This is a little bit much. So this is going in your head as you are lobbing and dodging these either questions that you weren't prepared for because they're slightly to the left of target, or you discover, I'm not as prepared as I thought, I'm not as framed up as I thought I would be, and I have to somehow scramble to define what that next frame could be to make me much more competitive in this conversation. To be honest, been in all those situations. The latter, not so fun. But to the book, it's interesting to just kind of follow along the bouncing ball of, so if I have this frame, what frame works best for me? And for the most part, time is good in many cases, but I'm anxious to hear what Mike thinks about it.
Well, I think the important point is when Harold, you were describing tap dancing in a beautiful way.
Yeah.
It's like, okay, this frame isn't working. What do I do? There's nothing wrong with going, wow, that's a good question. There's nothing wrong with saying, wait, let me think about that for a second. Or even better, to ask a question back. So
Yeah.
are you asking, so one of the things that I coach people on is to say, so you're asking me about X. Now, I've encountered X at a place like this. I've encountered X at a place like this. What would be more helpful for you? So in other words, you're pulling them into, you're actually now bringing them into it, right, to say, tell me what's going to be most helpful for you. It does a couple things. It goes back into kind of the analytic framework. I have a lot of data here. I want to make sure my data matches your needs. Now you look deeper.
Yeah.
And then you can come back to start framing it. Okay, you want to talk about my time at Company Z. Let me tell you about Project X at Company Z. It was really interesting. Now all of a sudden you're getting the power back. Now you can reframe it. The idea here, and I think, is you're going to go through this exercise multiple times, and it's okay for you to pause. It's like a regular conversation. We have to get away from this idea, this is a piano recital.
And just to tag on to that tag, in your preparation, in anyone's preparation for this interview, you've gamed it out in terms of, here are the skill sets required for this position. Where could they possibly find questions to learn more about my experience, or to just kind of tap into any lessons learned that may have occurred during that time with either company A or as a consultant. And so as this conversation is happening, as an applicant, I can tee up questions to them that will allow me to demonstrate and to reinforce the frame that I have defined. Or I can learn more to demonstrate the skill sets or the experiences that I've used in building teams or directing teams toward a specific outcome. But to your point, questions are your lifeblood in making this make sense, because without that, you really can't be effective.
So, Harold, one thing I wanted to touch on is, we talk about eradicating neediness. Yeah. Right. And we talk about the, desire to not seem like you have to have this and the emotional entanglement. But how do we then also balance out the follow-up, right? Let's say you've gone through the interview, you've essentially pitched yourself, you've met with everyone, the room seemed warm, everyone seemed like they were enjoying it, you were enjoying it. Where is that professional line between follow-up and neediness?
That's a good question, but I think the way they presented the Zen approach really kind of helped me understand, all right, I want this job. This is exactly what I want, but I don't want to feel needy. Let's assume that I've been out of work for a period of time. You got to have this job. That's the last thing you want to come across as. So the opportunity to reinforce with fact of, here's my experience. Here's the impact that I've made in previous positions. And when I send the note back to them, thanking them, that's what I reflect on. Here are the experiences that I've had. Here's the impact that I've had in this area in similar situations. And I look forward to hearing from you within the next period of time, if you feel so bold as to put a timepiece on the backside of that. Again,
I love it. Using the time
opportunity, you're living pretty on the edge, but still, that's one way of doing it. But I really like the approach of, I can just leave this here. You know who I am. You know what I've done. You know the impact that I've made. Let's see where we go from here. Sorry
to have stepped away for a moment. My network decided that it was going to take a short break. What I was going to add to Harold's point that I think is great is I have a belief that if I've gone through an interview process and I've done it well, and was back in my recruiting days and now as a coach, the most aggressive statement I should have to make is, I can help. If you've done all this work, you should not have to have a pound the table close. I can help. And to take Harold's thought, you know what, there's a great statement you can add in a note later. You know what, my time with you guys is invaluable. I really learned a lot. I do recognize that the problems you have, I would love to assist you, because they are things that I've got a strong background in. And I am in dialogue with other people, but quite frankly, you guys are top of my list. You are top of the stack, and I'd love to talk further. I know I can help.
I love it. Gentlemen, thank you both so much for joining this conversation. For everyone who's watching, this concludes our conversation around Pitch Anything. Next week, we're going to begin conversations and reading the book Extreme Ownership. And so we're quite excited to bring that to you. All of this is tying together for our job seekers or those who are looking to level up in their career. As we talked about, at the beginning of this, we are more than happy to speak with you privately on LinkedIn. We understand that it may be thoughts that come to you after the conversation. You can find any of us on LinkedIn. We're more than happy to dialogue, and we'll be looking forward to connecting with you next week. Harold, Mike, thank you so much for joining us. It's been fantastic. I really
thank you.
It's been fun. Thank you.
Been great.